kids, when did you realize your parents might be terminally stupid? Story 1. My parents have a tendency to never change their incorrect opinions, even in the face of facts. Some examples. My parents had a rocky patch in their relationship, and when they got over it, they joined one of those multi-level marketing schemes that had them buy audiobooks and travel to conferences to learn how to be happy. I think it was called Life or something, and they got really mad at me when I told them it was a crappy MLM scheme and refused to sit through the seminars with them. My dad believes almost every conspiracy theory that exists. His biggest one is that the government is using chemtrails to test biological weapons on us. My boyfriend was a pilot and tried to explain why this was ridiculous, but my dad would have none of it. He also sees climate change as a huge conspiracy. My mom thinks that preventative medicine is a waste of money and refuses to ever go to the doctors, gyno, or take her beloved dog to the vet. Luckily, all of her children were vaccinated. Every week, she buys some new homeopathic remedy, such as some low pH water that costs $15 a bottle that will prevent you from getting cancer, or some magnesium liquid stuff that you rub on your feet for some reason or other. My parents are convinced eating red meat or GMOs will kill you. At one point, I was working as a researcher in a genetics lab. I got into a heated discussion with my mom and showed her many sources to back my claims on GMOs, and she was unable to come up with a single source for her own claims, and it ended with her telling me that her opinion is just as valid as mine, and that I don't know more than her. Never mind the fact that I have 2 science degrees, and she has never taken a science class outside of high school, and has no idea what a peer-reviewed paper looks like. My mom is a heavy smoker and accepts that smoking can lead to lung cancer, but will argue that eating red meat is much worse for you than smoking, based on zero evidence. She sees her smoking as a tiny problem in comparison. My parents are also both very easily influenced by political propaganda, and it makes it very difficult for me to see eye to eye with them. At this point, I just avoid talking to them about most topics. Story 2. My parents are well educated, but this was one of the stupidest things I've seen them do. I was in the basement playing video games, and went upstairs to my parents, frantically looking for me. They were in that anger relief kind of state and told me they'd been looking for me for hours and were about to call the cops. Here's the thing. I had my phone on me the entire time and had received no calls or texts or messages from either of them. Also, none of them ever went down to the basement to check if I was there. Otherwise, they would have seen me. I couldn't have really left the house either because I wasn't old enough to drive at the time. I don't know what was going through their minds, but it definitely wasn't common sense. I would have loved to see the police officers' faces if they found me in the basement after they called the cops. When I was a kid, I lived on a military base, and a woman called to say her kid was missing. The whole base went on a lockdown while everyone frantically searched for this kid. An officer asked to come in and sit with the mom and wait to see if the kid showed up while everyone else was out looking. He walks in the house, and the kid is laying on the couch under a blanket. I'm going to chalk this one up to the general phenomenon that is parent poo brain, especially after years of having your brain divided between the gazillion responsibilities that just come with being an adult that also has to take care of a kid, coupled with lack of sleep and that innate sense of worry. Parent brains just don't function at their fullest capacity anymore, so they deserve some forgiveness in that regard. Story 3. When my parents just got through complaining they couldn't afford basics. Then my mother went and bought 2 $200 pillows and some fancy towels. They've never bought a home. They say they were priced out, but their stuff is all top of the line. They live in an expensive rental area. I offered to buy them a place, a quarter of the rent price. My dad, quote, must live near the ocean, so they keep struggling. Mom wants to move up here. When Dad worked, he made really good money, $75 to $80 an hour. Never saved a penny. Now he has his Social Security check and still wishes to live as if he makes $80 an hour. We have a big home in a rural area we could add on to or buy a cabin for them with some of our savings, effectively lowering their rent. They had opportunity after opportunity to buy and still wish they had. I'll give you an example of how they deal with things. One day, Mom got back to work and noticed her car was gone. Dad was in the parking lot waiting for her, in a new Mercedes. He had gone and sold both their car and truck, bought a 2-seater sports car and a giant boat. They couldn't tow the boat without the truck. These are my parents. This seems like entitlement more than stupidity. Story 4. I asked my mom for Super Mario All-Stars on the Super Nintendo for my 8th or 9th birthday. She had no idea what I was talking about, so I explained what the game was. For those who may not know, it had all the original NES Mario games, Super Mario World, and one other Mario game that I think was previously unreleased. The SNES was still new, so games were expensive, but that was literally all I had asked for, so I was fairly confident. A couple of weeks went by, and I didn't really think much about it. On my birthday, I came home from school to a big wrapped box, much bigger than the game. I tore into it and opened up the box to find an old Nintendo. Next to it were cartridges for the first 3 Mario games. I was so confused. Mom, it's exactly what you wanted. It is? Yes, I took your Super Nintendo and to the swap meet and traded it in for the games that you wanted. It's been over 20 years and she hasn't gotten any better. This post has genuinely made me recoil in horror. Well done. This is a classic mom faux pas, referring to any type of video game as a Nintendo. Whether it's PlayStation, Xbox, PC, doesn't matter. There was just such prominence, I guess, with the wave of Nintendo permeating American households in the early years of home video games, that it just stuck. Kind of like the debacle with Kleenex and Band-Aids. Both are brand names that older generations just use ubiquitously to refer to tissues and bandages. Story 5. Years ago, I was building a potato cannon, which my father was uninterested in, thinking it was just stupid, until he saw me working on it in the garage. I have the cannon in the vise and had just put in an electric barbecue igniter and wired it to some bolts inside to get a good spark. Suddenly, he's very interested. I had just managed to get a perfect gap with a strong arc, and he says, "Wait, let go of the button for a second," and sprays quick start, basically aerosol ether, and goes, "Okay, hit it now." Nothing happened. Both ends of the cannon are open, so it's just a tube, and the quick start he sprayed just dissipated too quickly. "Okay, hold the button for a sec." I'm not even thinking about what he's about to do at this moment, and he aimed the spray right at the live arc and created a fireball that came straight for his face, singeing his one eyebrow and corner of his mustache. I can't imagine what he thought was going to happen. Just like the simulations. Story 6. Every Friday, my mother goes grocery shopping. It's a block away, and she usually drives there. On this particular day, after she finished shopping, she decides to walk back. The next morning, she woke me and my father up to let us know her car was stolen. Cops come, we fill out paperwork, and in the meanwhile, she gets a rental car. That's not even the best part. The following Friday, she drives again to the grocery market and parks right next to her stolen car, which is a champagne-colored Mitsubishi Diamante, not such a common car or color. She comments how similar the car looks like hers, but makes nothing of it. A few days later, the cops called us to let us know the car was in the grocery store's parking lot 1 block away. Yeah, I got plenty of other stories, but that's probably the best one. I feel like that's a sign of something more serious. Story 7. When I was in 4th grade, my mother insisted on helping with my homework for some reason. I was always a smart kid. I never needed help, but she forced me to let her help. She proceeded to redo my math and spelling homework, and I failed both assignments. I told her those answers were wrong, and she fought me on it. When I got to school, I cried and told the teacher my mom made me put wrong answers, and I told her I knew the right ones, but my mom forced me to let her help. The teacher laughed, took my paper, and asked me the questions. After I got 2 right immediately, she marked everything on the page wrong and gave it back to me. She told me not to worry. She put 100% in the gradebook. She just wanted me to show that one to my mom. Years ago, I remember seeing advertisements for a show with Jeff Foxworthy called Are You Smarter Than a 5th Grader? It seemed to do a pretty good job highlighting the vast amount of rote memorization that kids learn in school that ultimately isn't directly used as an adult when we branch off into our own specialties. Of course, you want to pepper in a bit of everything when you're young, so you get a taste of all the knowledge that the world has to offer you. But then inevitably, most of it fades away, and you realize the things that you actually want or need to know in order to succeed in life and be happy. Story 8. Mom learned from someplace that cancer can't survive in acidic environments. So, to prevent cancer, you should drink lemon water to raise the acid pH in your blood to obliterate the cancer cells. She, up until recently, was an oncology nurse. I made her swear to me that she would never say this crap at work to her colleagues, and especially not patients or their families. I had to have a come-to-Jesus moment with her over this. I'm still gobsmacked that she bought this horse crap. The fun bit about this is that if you actively try to acidify your blood for prolonged periods of time, your body will try to counteract that by drawing alkaline material from your skeleton, making it brittle. Great way to get osteoporosis young. Turns out the human body is kind of fickle about pH. Story 9. My dad doesn't believe in carbon monoxide poisoning. My mom can't use the decimal point on a calculator. Dad thinks carbon monoxide is a scam to sell detectors and appliances. I rented a place from my parents that had an old heater, and it leaked the first time I used it. My roommates and I woke up feeling horrible. By sheer luck, I realized what it was. The fire department had to threaten my dad to get him to fix the problem. Mom likes to do the calculator thing her way. If you ask why, I think she gets confused when the last zero disappears. But math without it is actually worse, obviously, and some of my most vivid childhood memories are of her screaming at people on the phone because her numbers didn't match her balance. It was a monthly thing. Story 10. My mother is the living embodiment of the phrase, "I reject your reality and substitute it with your own." She once proclaimed that she didn't have to file taxes because she was a widow. When we pointed out that she could get audited, she then doubled down and said that the IRS only audits businesses, not people. I once hurt my hand and asked for some money to go to urgent care, and she told me to just go to the emergency room. It's free. She thinks passive-aggressive is a term I made up. She also once ate almost an entire block of a candy over a period of a week that had a thin layer of styrofoam on it, before realizing the styrofoam wasn't part of the candy. I can't imagine being oblivious to the sensation of styrofoam on my teeth. I always associate the phrase, "I reject your reality and substitute my own," with Adam Savage from Mythbusters. Of course, he says it in jest because, while it's important to form your own hypothesis, at the end of the scientific method, which they used heavily on the show, you ultimately accept the reality that aligns with the provable data. But yes, very fond memories of that man and this phrase. Story 11. My mom got a large inheritance, used it to remodel her house she hadn't paid off, then took a line of credit on it months after the housing crash. This is the single stupidest thing I've ever seen someone do with so much planning involved. It took months for this dumb plan to happen, and I tried to dissuade her every step of the way. It's one thing to put a fork in an electrical socket. It's a totally different thing to hire a carpenter to build a house, hire an electrician to wire it, go to Target to buy a fork, then put it in the socket. The thing with not-so-smart people who think they're smart is that it's nearly impossible to get them to listen to reason, especially if they have a plan. Story 12. When my mom said she just couldn't figure out why my aunt didn't like her after my mom borrowed $100 from her to buy us food and spent it on cigarettes and beer, stole another $20 from her to buy a DVD, and then hit my dad in the face with a frying pan. If your 6-year-old can figure it out and you can't, then maybe you're incurable stupid. Not my parents, but my great-whatever family. My grandfather was adopted, and at one point, he inherited some stuff from his adoptive grandmother. His aunt sued him for it, claiming he wasn't actually a member of the family because he's adopted. Then later would call and never understood why my grandfather refused to talk to her. The court found in favor of my grandfather, by the way. Story 13. Not my parents, but one of my dad's cousins was talking to us about how her daughter and her son-in-law were having a baby, but that she was worried about it because the son-in-law is deaf, and she was concerned their child would be deaf too. The conversation continued, and she then disclosed that the son-in-law is deaf because of a head injury from a bad car accident he was in when he was a teenager. My dad, who is a doctor, kept trying to reassure her that this was not possible, but she basically thought that you pass on to your kids whatever physical attributes your body has at the time you conceive them, regardless of how your body got that way. If this was the case, by that logic, then babies would come out looking like fully grown adults. Oh God, I do not want to picture a slime-covered adult fetus squeezing through a membrane. Luckily, I don't have to because I've seen The Matrix and can vividly remember the scene where a naked Keanu Reeves is disconnected from The Matrix and is essentially birthed back into the real world. Story 14. My dad once told me he had pancreatic cancer. I asked what stage. He said stage 3. I was devastated. Later on during the day, I asked my brother, he lives with him, "Dude, why didn't you tell me he had cancer?" My brother had the most confusing look and said, "He doesn't have cancer. He's been on this diet he saw on TV that consists of rice and vegetables. He's been eating like 1,000 calories a day for the past few weeks. He Googled his symptoms on WebMD and thinks he has cancer." Yeah, my dad is an idiot. Terminal idiot. Story 15. I was at dinner with my parents when my mom started feeling really unwell. We took her to the emergency room for chest pains, and she was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. The physician was asking my mom her family medical history and if anyone had diabetes in her family. My dad, a little drunk, asks if his family history would affect her. They are obviously not blood related. The physician just looked at him for a few seconds and then said no. Gotta be honest, read that kinda worried. I have type 2 now, and I'm not related. Story 16. My dad crashed his car at 8 a.m. on his way to work because he was surprised at a naked woman streaking across the road. When the police turned up and asked what happened, he explained that he ended up crashing as he wasn't sure if he really just saw a naked woman or if he was still drunk from the night before. And that is how he lost his driver's license, because oddly enough, there was a naked woman, and he was still drunk. At least he waited for the police to show up. Story 17. My dad texted me recently to let me know that this is the only year where your age plus the year you were born equals the current year. I told him I had a lot going on right now and didn't have time to research nursing homes. My grandmother sent this to me on Facebook a while ago, too, and I did not know how to respond, so I was like, yes, that's how math works. And she was just like, oh. Story 18. My mom calls me 45 times during work, even when I told her I'm too busy to even drink water, and I pull 15-hour shifts, and then gets mad because I didn't pick up her calls. Why don't you answer when I call? I don't know, maybe because I live halfway across the world from you and it's 4 a.m. when you call? I'm seeing why you live halfway across the world. Story 19. When my mom heard that drinking a glass of red wine a day is good for you, she poured my dad a full pint glass of red wine and he downed it. When I asked them what made them think that was an appropriate amount, they replied, "That's how much alcohol people drink in the movies." Shower thought, if people portray healthy habits in movies, people would inherently follow those habits. I think we're starting to see this a bit now, actually. The writing in some movies and shows that tackle real-life conflicts is getting so good, and I think there's definitely people working on them that have the best of intentions for the audience and the world at large. Ted Lasso comes to mind as a recent example of a show that does a good job demonstrating good habits for dealing with mental health, while also keeping the show entertaining and inspiring. Story 20. My dad is anti-vax and a flat earther. He thinks he's very smart. Good example of Dunning-Kruger effect. He's also very stubborn. He got into an argument with my brother and I about whether it was possible for us to travel faster than the speed of light and other physics stuff. His reasoning was, they did it in Star Trek, it can happen in real life. Not joking either. Story 21. My mom wanted to drive to the new Google office building to complain about her Yahoo email account. I barely managed to convince her that they are different companies. If I could convince my mom of this in less than 30 seconds, I'd let her go. Story 22. When I finally got the nerve up to confront my biological mother that her husband physically abused me, her response was, "Korean fathers take their daughters' virginity all the time. We are all white." I see that more as her being more sick than stupid. Story 23. In high school, grades were posted online. Dad wanted to check how poorly I was doing. I told him the internet is closed because it was after 5 p.m. Should have inspect elemented, screenshotted, then showed that after the internet closes. Story 24. Stepdad sees one of those tearjerker commercials about starving children in Africa, proceeds to rant about how there's plenty of animals to hunt in Africa, and why don't they just eat? Literally shouting at the TV, "Eat! Just eat!" Story 25. When she was fully convinced that the country of Mexico was made the 51st state of the USA in the 60s. No, she was not confusing New Mexico and Mexico. When faced with reality, she said that it was a widely taught fact when she went to school in the 70s. Story 26. My parents made me take piano lessons when I was 9. When I told them I wanted to be a professional pianist, they were ashamed. I really hope you're a professional pianist. Story 27. My mom got mad at me for getting a flu shot because the government uses them to track and poison people. I was 30 at the time. My mom thinks they make you Republican. Story 28. When my father went on Facebook and explained all about how the earth is flat, my grandfather actually told him to change his name since Dad is named after Granddad. I love your grandfather. Story 29. One night, my dad went to the McDonald's drive-thru and spent a solid 3-ish minutes talking to the trash can and getting angry it wasn't responding. I think your dad might be baked. Story 30. My mom broke into my dad's house with a gun, pooped her pants while in the house, and left the crappy pants on the stairs. I'm glad I read this. Story 31. Dad introduces me to someone I've never met. Dad, do you recognize this person? Me, 24 years old. No. Dad, but she held you when you were a baby. Story 32. My dad insists MLMs are worthy investments and genuinely believes the whole family has ESP. He missed a letter. The whole family has ESPN. Story 33. When I was about 14, my dad told me that drinking your own pee every day is healthy for you. Like, how? Both Mom and I spent almost 2 hours explaining why that was not healthy. Story 34. They questioned vaccines and discouraged me from going to college. I'm terminally stupid for listening to them. About the college part. Never too late, right? Ugh. Story 35. Trying to explain the difference between Wi-Fi and LTE to my mother in order to save her from data overages. Might as well try to teach calculus to a toddler. Story 36. My mom thought horses were born with horseshoes on. Of all the ridiculous stuff on this thread, this one tickled me the most for some reason. Story 37. When my father wouldn't allow us to get internet because they didn't need it when he was a kid. I have school. You dropped out in 10th grade. Story 38. Born in a Korean family, when my parents told me that fans would suck the life force out of me, even though my father majored in physics. Story 39. This week, my father insisted that there is a gay vaccine. God dang it, the one parent in this thread that believes in vaccines. Story 40. When they gave my college fund to a preacher so he could send Bibles to Nicaragua. Ouch. Story 41. My parents got hit by the second Microsoft tech support scam this week. Story 42. My mom asked whether World War I or II came first. Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.